Are there? Okay, thank you. Right, that's our American who is very kindly recording the talk this evening. Any apologies, John, that we know of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, have we had any apologies, Brian?
No.
No. Okay.
Well, one or two, but yeah.
Oh,
I can't remember now.
Well, thank you, Phil, for agreeing to it being recorded, because then members of the society who haven't been able to join us are able to access the talk if they so wish. So it calls for me to introduce tonight. We have very fortunate having two speakers. We have Phil Cox and Chris Drabble. Now, Phil, sorry, can you make sure that you mute yourselves, please?
Oh, I did, yes.
While I'm talking.
Don't worry. I just wondered whether you could come over sometime and have a look at one or two jobs I'd like doing.
Could you please mute yourself while I'm
talking? What are they?
talking?
It was a bit of tiling in the bathroom.
Helen?
Helen Drabble, could you please mute yourself? Well, thank you.
She has, right. Thank you. I'll start again. I'd like to introduce to you tonight, we have very fortunate having two speakers with us. We have Phil Cox, who's been involved in local archaeology for the past 25 years. And at the moment is part of Cheshire Museum Services, and he's working particularly at Bretton Park, which will be the subject of his talk this evening. Chris Drabble has been with Phil for 14 years. He was originally in IT for 30 years, and since retired has got more time to pursue his interest in archaeology. They're both members of BARC, which stands for Border Archaeology and Heritage Group. So the talk will be for about 45 minutes, and Phil is kindly agreeing to taking questions afterwards. And the title of the talk is Upper Brereton Park, the History and Archaeology of a Cheshire Estate. Thank you, Phil and Chris.
Thank you.
So if you can now put your videos off as well, so that it doesn't put too much load on the technology. Thank you very much.
Chris, can you put it on full screen?
Yes, you're on full screen.
Okay, well, hello, everyone. It's been a while since I've spoken at any old event. It's been a few years since the first as well. So it's nice to be back and talking about projects that we're doing. And although it might be very strange for me to start really, because it's the first time I've actually done one of these Zoom meetings. But I'm sure we'll get through it. What I'd like to do before we move on is to say that a little bit of sort of research. But in 1955, Hoskins wrote, "In the making of the English landscape, one cannot understand the English landscape and enjoy it to the full, apprehend all its wonderful variety from region to region, without going back to the history that lies behind it." Without William Hoskins, a great landscape archaeologist, historian. But how true that statement is, we ourselves are just passing through our landscape, with each generation leaving its footprint in the landscape for future generations to unravel its rich changes and the peoples that were involved in creating our landscape. No doubt in the generations to come, we will look upon our world with all the wonderment up to, and look back at the Bronze Age or the Anglo-Saxon period. In a small way, we are sort of using scientific methods, research, interpreting current and previous archaeological work at Bretton Park, and we are slowly unraveling the historical layers of its landscape, its peoples, and its history. So I'm really grateful also to Clifford Hargreaves for his work on the documentary and historical research, which has been placed in the context of national events. So, if you want to come off the screen, Chris, for a second. Move on to the next. Yeah. Okay. Right. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to look at the landscape of Brereton Park and its archaeology. We're going to look at the ownership of the park. We're going to look at their roles. There are some key families involved in it. We're going to look at the kiln site. We're going to look at the links between Lincolnshire and Cheshire. And Chris was going to discuss the pottery at the kiln site and look at some fabulous finds. I think you'll agree with us. And to conclude, we will present our 5 key links to date the kiln site. Kiln sites are difficult in one sense, because they're all on one place of one period. We tend to date them by looking at other sites where we can link, compare to those sites. But we've got a great opportunity at Brenton Park, where we have around about over 1,000 years of documentary ownership of that panel, and that's what we're going to look at. We were invited to go and undertake a dig down there by Helen, and we started with the kiln, because the kiln has been found in previous years, in 1980. So essentially, it was to re-excavate that particular dig. But what really happened when we started to do it, we thought maybe a year, maybe 2, maybe 3. Hang on, let's make it 7. So we've been at Brenton Park for 7 years. With the great host that Helen is, kept us watered, fed, etc., etc. But then we realised very quickly once we went into that, there was a lot more to the story. There is a story of Brenton Park, and it's about the landscape, it's about the people, and it's allowing us to how things affect our interpretation as we go forward. So what we're trying to do now is, I can't do 1,000 years in 45 minutes, but I can, but it's very quick. But I would think we ought to look at certain, it almost breaks down into 3 parts. And tonight, what I'm going to look at is from about 950 AD around to around, well, actually 1411, when ownership changed quite a bit after that. So that's what we're going to look at, that first part, because we can link all the other families in as we go through. So that's where we're going to go. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. Okay, so our 5 key objectives of the project, when we sort of sat down and discussed it, was 1, to look at the family. Now, those 2 people there, Philip and Paul, are key players in the game, which we'll come back to. We're going to look at the physical links with the pottery and the armorial. Chris will explain that as more and more, as he will with the pottery analysis and type, including the Zamorka round head, which are very special, we feel, and fairly unique. And then we're going to look at the distribution of the pottery in comparison with other sites in North West as well. Because when they wrote about the distribution in earlier books, I mean, Davy wrote in 1975 about, there are Cheshire kilns. They are from the Cheshire kilns. Well, Audle and Ashton, those places are still there. That's all. But Brenton Park wasn't known about in 1975. It was only discovered, if I'm calling that, in the 1980s, 1986. So when we're writing our archaeological records up, we're looking at what's known at that time. And the difference with this one, not only do we have 1 or 2 or 3, we have at least 3, we know of 3 in the area. All of a sudden that becomes a major site, a major production site. And there's a reason for that, there must be a reason for that, so we investigate that too. And also, one of the things that we don't ignore, but it's the effect of climate and change plagues in England. And we'll talk about one of the great volcanic eruptions in Salamas, in Lombok, in Indonesia. It seems a long way away, but it did have an effect, according to the records, on the weather conditions in Northern Europe anyway. So those are the 5. There's a lot of stuff to get through, a lot of bits and pieces to get through. And it's, sometimes you don't do it justice, but bear with us. Okay, so ultimately we're looking for the date of the so we can tie it down a bit more close. Chris? So one of the places that we look at, the Oraby family are one of the key families in the area, because initially they had land around where Helen's is, or where the kiln is, and then it was in their hands for about 162 years as part of the land, until it became a deer park in 1411, and that's where we get the name the Brown's Park. It wasn't called Brown's Park when the Oraby had it. I don't know what it's called, but it wasn't called for that. But the Orabys came from Lincolnshire. They were sort of established there in the 1950s, and then they were fairly well-to-do family, and they sort of moved from there. They didn't actually all move. Some of the family moved to Cheshire, and they asked the question: why did they move? Why did they move to Cheshire? Why did they visit Cheshire? You know, what was the need for that? Well, I think a lot of it is to do with their position within the local sort of government, if you want to. So they had the right location, the right place at the right time. They had this connection with the Earls of Chester, who at the time in the 13th century, one of them was actually Earl of Lincoln as well, and Philip Oraby was actually one of the constables of the castle of Lincoln. So you see the connections forming, and also by marriage too. You know, they were married into different families, the great families at the time. So you can see where that move was coming from, and eventually they moved across one part of the family into Chester. And you said, and we talked about the right connection, and and because of their power, and they would have had a lot of power. I mean, they had the rights. I mean, Philip Oraby had the rights to the Wilford Market and an annual fair. Yeah, he would have been quite a wealthy man, I would have thought. So he had this power. There were justices of Chester, there was Justice Cap. There were constable of castles in Chester and North Wales and Lincolnshire. They were keeper of the abbey. They were keeper of the forest. They had so many different titles, it was unbelievable. But Fulk Oraby, his son, Philip's son, actually married a lady from Lincolnshire, and they came back to Chester. That was quite nice of them. But they had the power, they had the land. They could organise their economic interest in Chester, and also they could put people in place to make that happen for them. So that, you know, that's how they come. I mean, there's a lot more detail. What you will find in towards the end of the year, there will be a sort of book or a report published. We'll give you all the finite details that we're going to the in one go. Can I go to the next one? Okay. This is a literal psalter. This is I've lost them. Yeah. This is from Lincolnshire. It's also called the Lincolnshire Psalter. And in that you can see a few sheep. You can see a couple of rams as well with curly horns. I hope you can anyway. And those curly horns will play a part a bit later on. But I think to a sheep, if the fleece of the sheep in those days was something like 10 pence, 10 medieval. And Lincolnshire is well known as a sort of a.
Phil, can I just interrupt there? We're having things coming in on the chat saying the sound quality is poor. I don't know what we can do, whether you could perhaps speak a little bit more slowly.
I can do, yeah.
And I don't know whether you're too close to it or too far away, but it's sort of echoing.
Oh, right, okay. Um,
Can you?
no. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Yeah.
Yes. If you just speak a little bit more slowly and enunciate a bit better, I think.
Yes.
All I
Okay,
can
we'll do.
suggest. Okay. Thank you.
Where was I? Next slide, Chris. Right. Chris? Can we move? Can we show folk staple? Folk.
Do you want the family tree?
Yeah, please, the family tree. We'll just show you how much research that's gone into it over the last few years. Okay, just scroll down. These are all the families. There you got folk at the bottom there. Okay. So they actually moved by 1160 to Chester. Folk was there as well. It just shows you the amount of the detail. You need to look at it in more detail. We've got so much used to doing it over the last few years. Next one, Chris. And these are just little bits and pieces of information that we have gleaned over the years. And all it really does, this is about a piece of land exchanged with folk Oregon. But it gives a date of 1250. So it's all these little bits of information that actually will build up into hopefully the right answer at the end. Chris? Again, the Oribis are all over the place, and they're managed from many different families, including the standing one, which you can see on the screen. And all this really does is about saying that folk Oribi married daughter and heiress of Lestrade in Dolby in Lincolnshire, so that they'll be one of the angels. But you see the one next to it is the legs of man, I think. And the legs of man, Stanley, I think, was one of the kings of man, a title given to him there. So we can actually pick out various people by using different forms of information. Okay, Chris. Again, it seems a random piece of information, but what it does show you on this is an exchange. This is in 1348, because on the left-hand side you'll see 21 E3, which is the 21st regnal year of Edward III, and that really gives a final date to the Oribis' really direct involvement with that piece of land. Was given to the Bruin family, exchanged with the Bruin family, and so that's sort of ended there. Although it wasn't at the end of the direct link with the family in Chester, it was on that particular Italica. The last direct lady was Mary Della Rus. That was a bit later on, and that was the real at the end of that. And then it was taken over after the Bruins by the road. Okay, Chris. Right, on the trade and distribution, one of the things we looked at is that you've got we have evidence and reports from Dysart Castle, which is on the top in North Wales, the top slide on the left-hand side. And then we have the bottom left is Deganwy. That's the original castle of Conwy. One of the originals anyway. And also on the other castle, the gateway, is Beeston Castle. You probably know that well. Well, so why put castles on there? The reason is that because these castles only existed for about 22, 23 years. So the top one in Dysart, 1240, 41, 1263, and the one and the gangway at the bottom was around about the same time they were built. But they were all attacked and ruined around the 1263 period. Now that's important because pottery found from the ditches in the gangway are very, very similar to the pottery found at Brereton Park, most exactly in some cases. Now, the importance of that is that when it's ruined, the pottery in the 1241 in the ditch, or anything in that ditch has been sealed in the destruction. So it's sealed in, so it can't be any later than that. It's not above the ruined castle. It's in the ditch in between the 1840 or the 1241 layer and the 1261 layer, 1263. So that's important because we know then that the pottery could be, it's not a definite one, but it's highly likely that pottery will be helping us date the kiln. Well, it does date the kiln, but also more importantly, it helps add another record, another kiln or kilns to the archaeological record. That could actually change our views on other sites throughout the northwestern Wales and in Ireland and in the Isle of Man. The examples of one or two about that. But that's the importance. It might seem an insignificant thing, but in actual fact, it's fairly key in our assumption of the pottery date. That's that one. And there are examples in Beeston and also in Disseth, but De Gangway has the one which are closely linked. So it looks like we have a trade or distribution of that pottery, certainly into the coast areas of West Wales. And it's going to add another layer, another kiln, another industrial site, if you want, to the kilns of Cheshire, which were not known about prior to the digs in 86 and today. I think that's key to to our interpretation of the whole thing of the kiln. Suppress. Okay, this is the Slammerlass eruption, or it's not an eruption, it's not and it's like why put it in? Well, why put it in? Because when it blew up in 1257. That's the date one, or 1257. So you can see where we're going with this. We've got the castle, the right date. We've got the eruption, the right date. And don't forget, after that, it caused a lot of famine, epidemics, a bit like today, I suppose, from what was going on in certainly in reached Northern Europe. And there was winters and seasons of heavy rain, cold weather, disease, plague, lots of different things going on in the country. And that would affect the number of people available to do work, essentially, because there's nobody about most of the time, probably. So, so I think that would spread into, and I've got lists in the report, the list of dates and conditions about this, and it's quite detailed. But ultimately, what it's about is about a date, and that date, 1257, and it will move on. It will spread and last for a few years later. So that into the 1260s. So there we go. We've got the castle. We got the effect of volcanic eruption in Indonesia. We've got the families moving to Chester, and creating a dynasty within Chester. That lasted 162 years. They had the right jobs, they had the right economic power, trade power, the markets, and all those things. And so that, those things sort of link together, which hopefully we'll see by the end of tonight. Okay, Chris?
That's fine.
Is it okay? Right, Chris is going to move on to the pottery side. So Chris, could you hear me better then?
Yes.
A little bit. Okay. Right. So I've got some interesting things to show you. Less text. We've got some videos. We've got some 3D models, so I can actually take you into the trench. You can see the area that we dug and walk around it. I'm going to show you the mapping system that we use, where we collate all the information. And I'm going to show you some of what really it's all about, the treasure hunting when you find things. It is quite exciting. And we have had some very spectacular finds at the end. And this is a link that comes back to what Phil's been talking about, the Oraby family. Okay, can you hear me okay? Is that okay? I'm just going to switch to our mapping system. So we make an enormous amount of records that we've taken over the past 6-7 years. So where is Brereton Park? On the map here, Chester is in the centre, Wrexham down at the bottom, so Holt is just to the east of that. And Brereton Park is in this area that I've outlined here. If I zoom into there, the area that we're working on is like south of Tarvin, and it's to the west of Tarpley. And the area that I've outlined is called Stapleford. And the pink area is called Folk Stapleford, which is where our kiln is in. And that's a link to Folk to Oraby. This is his land. And the area that we've got in blue is Bruin Stapleford, which is part of this research we've done into the land ownership, was transferred out at a certain point. Brereton Park is this rectangle here, or it was in the 1400s, and Helen's land is this smaller area in here. I call my notes. Help. And our kiln is roughly on the edge at this point here. One of the things Phil talked about was the trade links. So if we have a look at the land here, we can show things like the elevation level. So you've heard of LiDAR data maybe, and you see these coloured pictures on the news increasingly. The way to interpret this is red is high land and blue is low land, and then the spectrum in between. So Brereton Park, or Upper Brereton Park Farm, sits on this peninsula, and it's got the River Gowie down at the bottom, and it's got Waterless Brook that runs across the top, and the kiln sites are sat above that low-lying land, so maybe it's getting the draft better. I mentioned the trade routes, so if I start to zoom out on the map, it's quite likely, and we can never prove it, that the trade went from our kiln site down Waterless Brook onto the Gowie, and if you follow the Gowie up to the Mersey, it comes out at Stanlow Point, which is where Stanlow Abbey used to be, and Stanlow Abbey used to have a jetty where ships docked to take trade goods away. So it seems a direct link there that it's quite probable that they went on those routes. And from that jetty at Stanlow Abbey, zoom right out, where we think we've found evidence of our pottery, so we're just doing matching, we get the Isle of Man, we get Dundrum in Northern Ireland, and we get Dublin. And from I'm from Lancashire, and the research I've done in Lancashire, I know that from the jetty at Stanlow Abbey, they also used to go across to Formby, to the River Alt, and from there, there's like a northern coastal route that eventually goes across Morecambe Bay. So there's a whole variety of routes, and it's probable that Stanlow Abbey and Chester were two ports that distributed this industrial site where it was feeding stuff out again. One of the things that we spend a lot of time on in the early days, if I zoom back in, is mapping. So sort of those off. We take like the OS maps to check the old field boundaries. We take tithe maps. To check the field boundaries, and we can plot out all the different field names. So those off. Because all of these gives us clues. Phil showed you some of the documents, didn't he? And they mention little words like stitch. And so by looking at the old names, we get an idea of maybe where the area that they were talking about. And it's, to me, the key is it's using, this is a free IT package. It's called a GIS, a Geographical Information System. So it's like Google Earth, but you can just keep adding more and more information. So you've got like a one place where you can cross-reference everything. So we've got all this sort of information going on behind the scenes. I'm just going to turn those maps off, and I'm going to turn Google Earth on. So what I'm going to do now is I've got a drone that I use. I want to take pictures, which we'll have a look at a video in a second. I also use it to do archaeological surveys. So I can take pictures, a grid of pictures over an area, and then turn it into a diagram. So the drone flight that we're going to go on, this is Helen's arm here. We're going to launch from this point here and look back towards a kiln. And then I'll just do a loop round the features that are on Helen's site. I'm going to run it fast forward very quickly. I'm going to spend 6 minutes on it. So this is from that point that I was showing. So we're looking towards the Mersey at the moment. This is Helen's farmhouse here. This is our kiln site, dead ahead. If I roll this forward, we'll do a spin round the countryside first just to get our bearings. So I'm looking towards the Mersey. I spin that round, I'm looking towards Chester. And at that point, I'm probably looking down towards Holt. And you can see Beeston Castle coming in, which is one of the castles where we know we've got pottery. And it was owned, it was run at a certain point by Fulton Oraby, again, making those links. Looking across to the Cheshire Ridge and Burton, now looking at Tarvin and heading back out to the Mersey. So if I skim down quickly and fast forward, this is a trench that we spent 7 years digging. It's backfilled now. There are other kiln sites around out at the bottom of the field. There's a little L shape that we're looking at the moment. Let me just run that forward. Can you see the dark line running across the centre of the screen? We think this is possibly a Roman road. That alignment runs through all the hedges either side for quite a few miles. Old field boundaries show up. It's amazing what you can see from the air. There's a very strange feature that we've not investigated yet. Can you see two parallel curved lines running across the field here? Immediate thought is that maybe it's a big circle. It isn't. That would have been great if it was a giant circle, but we don't know what that is. That's for further investigation. Just going to skip back up to the house. There's a strange curved feature here that one day we'll have a look at. So let's a quick look round the area that we've been working in. So how do we tie that into what we've dug? I think you can see on that Google Earth image there, there's just a shaded area which was our trench. I mentioned with the drone, one of the things I can do is get it to do an aerial survey and then turn that into an overhead image. Now, when you take normal photos with a camera, they're distorted because the line directly down to the ground is, let's say, 30 meters, but the edges, the distance is greater. So you take overlapping images, I take about 50 usually, run it through a piece of software, and it will stitch them all together. So I get a very precise image of what's going on. Now, the beauty of this is I can do it every year. So I can click on previous years and show how the trench has grown. And we've got a record of everything that we came across when we came. Even if we backfill it later on, we've still got an accurate record of what's going on. Part of the system that we've got here is it's got a measuring tool in it. If I want to measure the width of the kiln, which is this shape over here, I get measurements coming out any of the features that I'm looking at. So once we've recorded it in, we've then got the option to record it and pull out. This is from my mobile phone on a big stick on the days before I had a drone, but we've still got a record of everything that's going on. I'm interested in things like that dark patch and keeping a log of where that's been. All of that can be turned into a drawing. So if I just put on for the best image, which should be that one. And this is just a bit like doing an Etch-a-Sketch. I can then go round each of the elements in here. If you look at the detail of the drawing, I can see individual stones. We've got a very accurate record from the drone survey of exactly where everything is. Remember, I've got a ruler, I can measure things off. One of the things that we're going to look at a little bit later on, every area of the trench, we give a number to. So if we find a pit, this is pit 88, this one's pit 87, 89, everything gets a number. So when we end up with all the finds and we need to archive them, we can know exactly which area of the drawing it relates to. And then if something's earlier than another one, we can work all that. Okay, so I'm going to shrink that down and go back to my presentation. Skip through the slides, you've seen those. Finally, on this section, over the course of about 6 weeks, every week I put the drone up. It's only got 20-minute battery life, and I surveyed the whole estate to get a very high definition aerial photo that's to scale. And the things of interest, can you see down at the bottom in the center, you've got this curved feature that we saw from the actual video across the air. It shows up very clearly there. Old field boundaries that you can't see on the ground show up, all the lines in this field here. This is our, look at the top, is our trench. And one of the things that we can't explain yet, that is, if you look running across diagonally across the screen, there's a straight line pointing directly to the trench, as if there was a road at some point, and that could be a route out. Now, we have put a few test pits into that road, and it's an earthen bank. It's definitely a feature. We can't really say for sure what it is. Okay, so just to summarize that section, we've recorded an awful lot of information. Some of it's video, some of it's pictures, some of it's maps. We've got the location of all the castles, the location of all the moated sites, abbeys and things like that. We put it all together into this system, then we can analyze it all and start to draw conclusions. So what I'll do now is I'll take you into the trench itself so we can see in detail what we found. And the most exciting thing, I think, as Phil mentioned, we've got a medieval pottery kiln. They're as rare as hen's teeth. And for all the ones that have been excavated, because I've read dozens upon dozens of reports that have come out over the past 50 years, most sites, it gets found when they're doing a building, they look at it for a week and then they bury it. And we've had the opportunity to look at a very well preserved kiln, and we've had 7 years to study it slowly. So that gives us a very unique opportunity. Phil mentioned that there was a dig in the 1980s, 90s. and they discovered the kiln, and then they backfilled it and covered it on, put a plastic sheet down, and then backfilled the tip. So in 2015, this is what we found when we pulled the plastic back, when we'd identified where the kiln was. And what you can see is a white central element, called as a pedestal, and you've got these fire bricks. It's like a radial arm. So we end up with a shape that's a bit like a cartwheel. By 2017, and I'd like you to note how much water there is here, it's a very wet site. It's made of clay and the water doesn't drain. We've had to dig trenches into the ditch that's next to the trench just to get the water off the side. So 2 years later, we've cleaned back everything, all the parts of the kiln. We've pushed it back, the bank back a bit further. Now the things to look at here is on the left-hand side here, there was no kiln wall here. So what we've got is basically 2 letter C's with a gap at the front, and there's about 2 inches worth of burning. So this will be where the fire pit was. That was like the active part of the kiln. The fire bricks have a gap underneath them. So the hot air coming out of the fire, which is a bit lower, would have run round under the fire bricks and hopefully out the other side is what we were thinking. The next thing to look at is, if you look down on the right-hand side here, in the bank, there is about 12 inches of pottery in a dark, soily type material. Now, in the picture there, you can see bits of pot in it. There is no soil, it is just solid pot. And the biggest problem we've had on this site is there are so many finds that we have to sort of have a rule, please don't lift it unless you have to. We've ended up lifting thousands of bits of pot just to get at what we need to see. I've seen one bit of medieval pot in the 14 years I've been digging on other sites, and I've seen thousands upon thousands on this site. It's the most unusual and great opportunity to study medieval pot. Now, if you look at this photo carefully, you can see that that dark layer that's about 12 inches thick on the right-hand side actually runs across the top of the kiln. And it comes out the other side for about a metre or so. So what this is there'll have been a pile of pottery wasters that they'll have kept very close to the kiln. Now, pottery wasters like all these broken fragments. So when you fire a kiln, you're quite lucky if 75% of your pots survive. So about 25% typically will break. And they don't throw all that away, they keep that, they throw it onto a pile. So when the potter is filling the kiln full of pots, he needs he'll balance one pot on top of another, and he'll ask his apprentice, say, get me a piece about this big, and he'll put that in the kiln just to hold the pot up. So they need a massive pile of stuff to keep it all. They use it to build future kiln material, and they use it to prop the pots up within the kiln. When the kiln goes out of use, we want to return the land back to agriculture, and they push these piles of pottery over, they flatten it out. So the fact it's running over the top of the kiln tells you it must have happened, this event, this black layer event, must have happened once the kiln went out of use. There is nothing between that black layer and the kiln. Digging through it, you go down, you take the pieces out, and when you take the last piece out, there's a kiln directly underneath it. So I reckon it happened within days. The kiln decided it went out of use, they moved all the pottery and spread it all around. And this has been a key for us in determining how to interpret the site as we're digging it. This is an overhead shot from a few years later. Just go back one shot. If you look at that black layer, can you see in the center there's like a rectangle? It's as if it's dropped down. Now, if you keep your eye on that circular shaped stone there, next to it, that's a stone here. This is where the second flue was. So we've got burning on one side. The second flue is here. We've identified it, but there's actually no evidence that they did any burning. So it's probably used just for ventilation. In a damaged part of the kiln, we dug through the center to see what was underneath it, and you can see it's a collection of rubble stones. So they put a rubble layer down as a foundation first, and then they covered it with this red clay. This is about 3 inches thick. So they put a rubble layer down, they covered it in 3 inches of clay, and then each firing makes that harder. So it becomes part of the structure. It's very hard to get an overhead shot of everything that we found. So what we did in the last couple of years was push back into the bank. And what we found is 2 further shapes, which are probably kilns, we can't say for sure. And they run underneath the big cartwheel shape that will be the last kiln. So we think we've got a sequence here. The big fancy kiln on the top, which is very advanced for the time, with its double flue system and these fire bricks, sits on top of these 2 that are in the ditch underneath. So I mentioned one of the things I spend a lot of my time doing over the past few years is I traced over those images. And I also tape measure out in the field and check it all out with a tape measure. And this is a diagram that we've ended up with. We have a big circular kiln that sits on 2 smaller kilns. These kilns are far less sophisticated. On other kiln sites, when you read the report, sometimes a kiln is just identified as a red stain in the ground. They have no structure left at all. So we're really lucky to have 2 small features where there's some structure left and 1 where the majority of it's left, and we can see exactly how it works. So we have these 3 kilns here. And then we draw out, and I briefly showed this before, we've got a series of pits. So what we were trying to find here is we were looking for the buildings that the potter would have used. He would have needed somewhere to keep the clay, would have needed somewhere to keep the pots while they were drying. He'll have had a potter's wheel probably somewhere. He'll have had pits that he'll leave the clay to winter so that they can dig it out from whatever quarry they use. They leave it in water to settle over the winter so that it's a clear clay when they come out. And pit E is about the size of a bathtub. It was very deep, and that's probably the pit they used for wintering. And pit B was full of pure clay. So it looks like they settled the clay in this pit here, and then they had it over here, which I would guess is roughly where the workshop is, so they've got fresh clay to hand to make the pots with. We've got burnt wood shapes and we've got post holes. Not enough really to say where the buildings are, but we have got some evidence of the activity that takes place around the kiln. What I'm going to do now is switch to the screen here. So with the drone, I can do this survey. And not only does it produce an overhead picture, but I've actually got the kiln and the kiln site to walk around. So when I'm writing my elements of the report, I often call this screen up just so I can go back to the final version and have a look exactly where things were. But if I need to, I can go back 2 years and have a look at where features were in 2017, 2016, and things like that. We've started to backfill at this point, but you can still just about see here the 2 circular pits. You can see on the side over here the start of the big bathtub starting to appear. You can see, I'm just going to try and get into the ditch. Go in, there's the trees. You get an idea, oh, a bit too far. You can see the 2 kilns roughly down at the bottom. It's a bit like the melted world, isn't it? And the cartwheel kiln on top. So we've got all this material that we can use when we get to the report. Right. So, what do we think was going on? So this is my interpretation. We spend too many hours debating all the different theories that it could possibly be. And the problem is every single theory could possibly be right. We weren't there, we'll never know, but you try and come up with a theory that explains what we found. This is my favorite theory. I think there was a flat field to start with, and they dug a pit about 3 meters across. I think they then built the foundations for one of those ditch kilns in it. And the rest of it's lost. There's been a lot above ground, all that's disappeared. I think then they built this yellow kiln here, so that's my big cartwheel kiln with the centre and the fire bricks coming through, and some of it used the old kilns as a foundation. But when we've dug inside the kiln, we don't find this red kiln, so it only runs into the edge. Once the site went out of use, so I'm thinking something like 1260s, that sort of era, the pile of wasters that was sat next to it was pushed over and spread out so that they could return the site from an industrial site back to agriculture. And that's layer of pottery, which is in some places 12 inches thick, got weeds and stuff growing in it, which gives it the black colour. At some unknown later date, to do with the Brereton Park, the emparkment, they dug a ditch, and what they did then is cast up the soil that we're digging out of the ditch on top of the kilns, which buried the kilns. And that explains how we've got this layering of different colours and different layers going through. It fits. And the way these series work is one day we discover something new and go back to the drawing board and start again. Finish off on the kiln. This is what it probably looked like. So I've done like a 3D reconstruction. So I've got my cartwheel shape with the centre and the spokes, and there would have been 2 tunnels. It would have had a dome across the top, and this would be like a wicker basket, which they stick hand put clay in, which fires once the kiln fires. They would fill it with pots. They would get charcoal or wood, and they would light it. And you can see, when I did this a couple of years ago, I assumed there was fire at each end. And now with the view, there's probably only fire at one end, and the other was used for airflow. And that's why those big round stones are there, so they can block it off and control the airflow. It would have had a lid on it. Okay, to finish off with, let's see what we found, because we couldn't help lifting bits up because the kiln was covered in pottery. We had to take at least that element off to see the kilns. Just some stats for you. We've got in Penny's barn, which is where the finds are at the moment while we do all the archiving, we've got 260 kilograms of material. So it's a massive amount of finds that we've got. We've got 27 8-kilogram boxes so far filled up. We've still got all the door and stuff to do. We've got 96 jug spouts, which are incredibly rare. We've got 231 handle fragments. So it's not handles. They often break into 3. So I'm thinking we've found evidence of at least 96 jugs, around 100 jugs. We've got 4,500 individual body sherds, and a lot of which are decorated. We've got 51 special finds that end up going in the report because they tell us something really interesting about what's going on. And in total, just short of 6,000 items we've lifted, trying not to lift things. We could have doubled that easily, and probably trebled and quadrupled if we'd have gone just to try and find what was going on. Just to show you what happens to that, each of those items or bag of items has to be logged as part of the archive. So we have like box numbers. This is a box of bases, and we know whether it's reduced or oxidized, whether it's got thumbprints on it or it's straight. Remember I mentioned those context numbers that we allocate each pit and each area on the kiln site. We know which area that bag of items came from, how many there are, and what they weigh. So we spent, Phil, probably the last 18 months, the 4 of us going through, just bagging things up, logging it, and then putting them in boxes ready to go into our archive. But the moral we've learned is, if you're going to dig, don't find anything, or put it back, record it in a different way. The type of things that we found are medieval jugs. On the left-hand side of this screen is what a medieval jug will look down. Down at the bottom is one in the Grosvenor Museum and 2 that's from one of the local Cheshire kilns. The 2 in the centre of the screen are reconstructions. This orange one was reconstructed in the 1980s from what we found in that trench, and the black one is what I reconstructed several years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. And the way that one worked is we found the spout, and then underneath it, it's like it had been squashed. So as you excavate, you slowly found more and more of the jug. You get jars. So the definition of a jug is it's taller than it's wide. The definition of a jar is it's wider than it's tall. So it's like a cooking jar. These are big, about 30 centimeters across. We also got some elements called pipkins and skillets. So skillets a bit like a frying pan. You can't really tell when you find little bits of that, but you can tell the distinctive handle. And a pipkin is a smaller cooking pot, and it's got this strange hooked handle. We've got plenty of these. From looking at pictures, we know what sort of how to tie those finds in. A lot of these pots were very decorated. So Phil's mentioned like dates around the 1250s, 60s, 70s. This style of decoration or decorating your pot was very popular in the 1200s. It didn't happen so much in the 1100s, and it had gone out of fashion by the 1300s. So just the style of decoration gives us a good clue as to the sort of dates we should be looking at. These are called applied strips. So what they do is they make a small sausage of clay, you place it on, and if you look at the one on the top left, they then stab it to make it look pretty. If you look at the bottom left, they've used a thumb to just press in to make a pattern. The most common pattern we get from this kiln is these dots, and it's made by a comb. Potters still use combs, and they've just stabbed it. And sometimes these are really good examples of it. You see this one at the top right, they've stabbed it and sort of made a motion at the same time. So these three on the right hand side are what we find all the time. So it's typical of what the potters were doing at Brereton Park. These jug spouts are most unusual. On other kiln sites, apart from one, they don't have these sort of jug spouts. So the jug spouts are shown here. It's a bit like a kettle jug spout. It's a tube. They take a strip of clay, they bend it, they make it into a tube, and then using their finger and thumb, they then press it on to the body, and then they push a hole through the back so the water can come out of the jug into the spout. So if I turn that round, it would have a hole, and we can see that. Now, we've got best part of 100 of these jug spouts. It means we can sit down and study and see all sorts of detail. The majority of them have fingers down the left side and thumb size prints on the right hand side. So we're thinking there somebody has used their left hand and they're pinching the spout to press it on to make it home. A smaller percentage have these stab marks, and they've used the end of the thumb, and it is a thumb, you can put your thumb in and it fits, to press it in. And some, they've used a pretty rubbish technique. They place it on and they've just smeared out the edges. These come off, so it's a very poor technique. You see things like the thumber's nail. You look down the line of the thumb hole, we get that quite frequently. So whoever this chap was, he had nails about 2 millimeters long. Very hard to find bases, but we did at the end find a complete base. And can you see the spiral in there? It's like they've made a coil and spun it round and then smoothed it out. The jugs have these thumbprints down the bottom. Quite quickly. Our jug handles are quite distinctive. I'm always looking for things that will help, say, you know, somebody finds in the future, this has come from Brereton Park, therefore it's for that mid-1200s period. All our handles have got a line down the centre. So they stab the handles with a knife when it goes in the kiln to stop it exploding. So that's quite common. And if you look at number 15, that's what other sites commonly come up with. That's a very common medieval jug handle in England. Or it might have thumbprints down the middle. Ours have a line down the centre, or 70 to 80% of them do. Again, it's a very poor design. If you look at the cross section I've drawn for number 12, you can see the line down the middle is pressed too hard and it's almost gone all the way through. And we do find quite a lot where it's snapped in half. So it's quite interesting. I mean, you know, welcome to my world of studying all this. When you draw things and photo them in this detail, you really do get a feel for how the potters were working. Finally, we started to find, and we only noticed this in the last year, we found handles have got a little stud, a little lug on the end of it. And then we noticed we were getting some pots where the handles come off that had a little hole. And on a lot of the jugs, if you look in the inside where that hole is, it's like flattened out. So it looks like a common technique that we're using was to put a lug on the end of the handle, press it into the hole, and a bit like a rivet on a ship, smooth it out on the other side as a way of securing the handle. Now that's, I'd never seen that before, but when I'm reading up on it, it does happen. People have noticed that across the country. But again, it gives us just a bit of an idea to help to identify pottery that's come from Brereton Park. So, summing those up, and on to the last section, we have these spout type handles where you've got fingers and thumbprints around the side. It is most unusual. We get it in Bristol. You get it at one of the Cheshire kilns as well, but it's only 3 miles from where Falkner Aubrey was born, interestingly. I don't know if we can make a connection there. You get this coned strips marks on, you get handles with a stab down the centre, and finally, just to tie back to what Phil was showing you, some of those slides, we get jug spouts where they've actually attached a ram's face and horn on. Now, this was about 10% of the jug spouts we found. Stunned me. I thought they would be really rare. We got 100 jug spouts, 10 of them had a horn, had a face on. Let's have a look at some of those. Just call up another slide. They're all 3D model. What I can do, I'm not using my drone on this one, use my phone. Once I've got a piece, I can actually make a record of it. Look at this chap here. Because we've got 10, we've got just enough so we can start to see a pattern. I think these are the earliest ones. You can see it's a ram, but the horns are very crude. It's like one slab of clay and sort of made it. And for the facial features, it's just got a circular stick and made holes. And they've got carried away and just put them sort of everywhere, but you get eyes through there. Just go through these quickly. Got one a similar style. This one's been in the wars and got flattened. You can see again, it's got these circles, but then they've gone mad and again started stamping circles everywhere. So it's a very crude representation of a ram. Then you get the intermediate ones where they've got a bit better. Now, it could be it's a different year and it's a different potter and he's a bit better at it. We don't know, we probably never will know. You get a heart-shaped face, and we've got a few of the jug spouts where the face has come off and you can see the mark, the heart-shaped patch where it's come away from. They've got quite nice horns now that are attached on the side, and some of them have got stab marks in a bit like the handles to stop them exploding. And then finally, you get the really good elaborate ones. So this is probably the most elaborate one that we found. Let him load in. His horn is like an S shape. The fingerprints aren't just fingerprints, they're made like a design out of it on both sides. So it's much elongated. The face is very detailed. We've got nostrils on this one. And that's how I've sort of graded them. How detailed is the face? And the more detailed it is, I've assumed it's a more advanced one. Turn it around. So there's the jug. Can't see the hole, but oh yes, you can. Can you see that it's come out as a shadow? There's a hole the water would have gone through. It was poured. And you see there, he's used a pointed stick to make the eyes. So just to finish, one of the interesting things you can do, because this is a 3D model, I can actually move the camera inside it so I can see the shape of the tool that was made to make that indentation. Which I'll show you a few. So we've got crude ones, better looking ones. This one looks a bit like the screen. And these are almost like gargoyles, aren't they, that you would find on the church. I can't tell you how exciting it is. I found this one and I found a little corner of the horn. I'd seen so many, I knew straight away what it was. And over the course of 2 hours, slowly move the soil away to reveal him. So just to finish off, I mentioned, you know, those eyes, they were made with a tool that had a sort of tip like that, might have been a bone. Those circles were made with a tool, I do apologise, a tool, a circular tool made, nowadays it'd be like a back end of a biro pen would make a similar make. So it's got a hole in the centre. Okay, so we've looked at where the mapping and detailed surveys that we do. We've looked at the kiln site itself, how we log where everything gets recorded from, and then looking at the finds, trying to work out some sort of patterns that will help build data. So I'm going to hand back to Phil now. For a summing up slide.
Yes.
Over to you, Mr. Cox. Sorry, it's gone back to the beginning, wouldn't you? Would you know it?
Can you show me the, Chris, could you show the slide with the 1248. A piece of paper document.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Yes, I know which one you mean.
Yeah.
I know why you want to look at it.
Yeah, because what I failed to mention on the fortuitously, because Chris has mentioned it now, is the ram's head with the horns. But obviously, Lincolnshire is well known for sheep, and I presume rams too. But also, if you look on this where Chris is floating around now, you'll see the crest of the helmet. Can you point out the helmet, Chris?
So yeah, the helmet's here,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
the shield is here,
Shield there, and on the
and
top,
the ram is sat on
the
top.
ram's head is on the top, and that's the seal of the Oribis. So that's the link between one of the links. We have other examples too of the link between the ram's head, the Oribis, and it looks like they're making the particularly special pots for the actually head of the family at that point in time, which I think is folk. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Can I just say on behalf of everybody, Chris, that was amazing. I've seen little bits of it.
You know I love technology, Phil.
I know you do, and I haven't seen the full extent of it. But I have to say that was particularly spectacular.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. But Chris is just the end of a long line of the hours. I forget how many hours we put into the project over the years. There's been quite a few, and there's been lots of debate and arguments and all those things that go on, as always do on archaeological sites, especially with me and Chris and other people. But there we go. At the end of it, we come out with hopefully some reasonable and reasoned answers to the stuff. Just on a couple of points, you mentioned about the 5,000 pieces of pottery, which is quite a lot. There's also another 100 kilograms of bottle and daub, I should say, which we're just going through now. That's a lot. So we know what the kiln was made of. We've got most. I think, and the key thing I think out of all this is, it's one thing digging a trench. There's another thing recording. There's another thing. What do you do with it? And we've been negotiating and talking to Cheshire Museum, and that assemblage pottery from the kiln will be stored in Winsford, perpetuity, and it's got its own reference number. So anyone who wants to research, a PhD student or whatever, or a research student, but there's an archive there which is being put through, and more work to be done on it, so they can access and have a fine old time going through the thousands of pottery, and perhaps come up with some different calculations. I don't know. So that's what on that one. But so I'm going to roll it up now because we've gone through quite a lot. But we've looked at the family connections, and that's key. I've lost my screen. Yes.
Did you saw it on?
Yeah.
Okay. My apologies.
No, it's okay, Chris. No, you're
Okay.
forgiven. Are you back on? Yeah. Okay. So we've got the family connections. We've got the Oribis. There's very strong links between most of the major players in the kingdom, United Kingdom. So they're the big names, big hitters, and that's why they're quite powerful family. Kiln excavation, I think, no more to be said on that, and the pottery type and kilns. I think for the trade links and the external influences, you see where we go into all the data, all the research, all the information, all the time, sifting through it, sitting in libraries, whatever, all to come to a date. Now, our interpretation, based on what we found so far, is the kiln date is around about 1260, 1261-ish. Probably more exact than that, but that's going to give us a night in the mid to latter part of the 13th century. people can say, of course, well, we knew that anyway. I had no idea of that, but based on the style of it. But most importantly, we know where it is, who own the land. We haven't got the potter's name, unfortunately. We could probably make one up, but we're not going to. But yeah, so we have a lot more information, just that the actual kiln itself and the excavation. But the team have done a marvelous job over the last 7 years. We've still got more to do, and there's probably more surprises to come. Who knows if there's another 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? We don't know. We know it's a major site. We do know that, and hopefully in the next 2 years we'll find a bit more. Who knows? So on behalf of Chris and myself and the group, that's where we're up to. Wait for the report to come out, which will have a lot more detail in. So you won't say, well, I don't quite understand that. It's all explained in the report, or will be. And hopefully we're going to get, all things being equal, we'll have this out this year. And then we move on to the next day. So thank you very much for participating, listening. And I hope you've gleaned a little bit more about some of the wonderful things we find out. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay. Right, thank you very much. We have some time for questions. If anybody would like to indicate that, just put your hand up and then unmute yourself and ask a question to either Phil or Chris. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, hi Phil. Are there any indications of the volumes of pottery being produced and over what period?
He said 5,000 pieces.
Yeah, we have 5,000 individual items.
Yeah, but those are all scrap ones.
Yeah, that's right. If you go to the pots, that sort of size. Yeah, and it broke, and don't get we're in the kiln, and it blows out, explodes. They could be 200 pieces of pot from little bit. The pot has become 200 pieces. So I think in terms of volume, I don't know. Chris, have you got an idea on that? Chris, can you unmute?
Yes, I was mute, yeah.
Can you bring Steve up to speed on that volume?
Yeah, it's very difficult to know. We don't know how long the kilns are in use.
Right.
And like Phil says, a pot, one of those big jars that I showed and the big jugs, they'd break into 50 pieces. So the fact we've got 5,000 pieces, probably maybe 20,000 are on the site if we were to take them all, isn't the number of pots. And what you've got to remember is those are the ones that failed. And we don't know what success rates the potter achieved. So the vast majority wouldn't have broken or have gone off to market. But it's possible that the site was only in use for a few years.
Mm.
It might be that they had one of those ditch kilns one year, and the next year they built a new one next to it. And then finally, they brought in somebody from Normandy who was an expert potter who built that big cartwheel one, said, this is how you do it. It might have lasted a couple of years and was gone.
Right, okay.
There's nothing I've seen that said it ran for 30 years or something like that, but it could have done. This is
in the future.
Yeah, it's trying to, and what will help us is if other people on other sites find similar pottery and they can date their site.
Right.
Because that will then feed back to us that it was running for year after year, or the drugs were around for all those periods.
I think one of the things to say about wasters is the fact that it's a kiln site. The dating of those kiln sites is normally made from other sites where you find something in the same layers and the same period where you can date it, say 1250. Then you say, well, there's a bit of pot over them, so that must date the kiln 1250. But it don't work that way. Yeah. So it's who knows? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a difficult one to work out.
I think what we can say, it was a substantial investment that the owners made. That's quite a complex kiln. They brought somebody in who understands how kilns work for the final phase. So they must have felt it was worthwhile, and it was an industrial site. And the other thing to remember is we think there might be 8 dozen kilns in the area. We've only luckily come across 2. We know there's one on the other side of the brook, but if there's one on that side and 2 on this side, there's probably half a dozen on each side. So it could be that it was a big industrial site and therefore of regional importance.
I think of national importance.
Chris, could I ask you, I mean, it was quite a long distance from the site of the kiln to the estuary where it would have been transported overseas. How do you think they moved the pots so that they, got to the export site in good condition?
I think they would have had multiple routes. I remember I showed you a drone image of the whole series of fields, and there's a line running across it. Now, I can't explain that what is. The field is clay and it's exceedingly wet, but that area is dry. So it does look like it was a route out. And that would have gone down to the River Gowie, down where the mill is at the moment, down in Uxley.
That would have gone on some sort of a barge, would it then? Or
something like that. I think, they would float it down, and it would, the water levels would have been different. And it's possible that it was navigable or could have been dragged along as a barge. But for me, one of the key things is at Stanlow Abbey, which was only active for 50 years or so, they had a jetty where they had trade boats going. So it was a good point to get to and very easy for them. But they could have equally just put it on a horse and cart and taken it into Chester Market.
Right.
Probably did both.
Yeah, they'll have done both. And
Helen.
the other thing is,
Sorry,
Helen.
Helen.
Can I just ask, have you any idea where the clay came from? Because it sounds as though they were using massive amounts of it. Would they have collected it from far afield or locally?
Well, I think locally. I think the geology, the clay there. That's where, and there's many holes that's been dug in the landscape, almost like clay pits. They've dug the clay out of it. So I would say that it's local, really. Because if you have to imagine the landscape. Thanks, Chris.
So
yeah,
this is a LiDAR image of the area. So there's our trench, there's woods over here, all the interesting features in the woods. And can you see down here? This is a line running down to the brook, and there's like a quarry. I think it's quite probable that that is the source of the clay to feed kiln here and a kiln over here. And there'll be other, if you look around the landscape, there's all sorts of quarries going on. So it's likely that those are where it came from, where they got the clay.
Yeah, I think what you've got there are the natural resources. What pottery makes. You've got wood, you've got water, you've got clay. So you have all the ingredients really to do that. That's right.
Yeah, Helen, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, and just in case anybody's interested, Wrexham Museum have put on a very good exhibition. It's in T-Pow, and it's all to do with the pottery making in the Wrexham area, but it's not pottery as so much. It's bricks, tiles, and ornaments to go on building.
Is that like Rwabban brick and things like that?
Yes, and I was astonished at how many different companies were involved and how extensive the industry was in the area. So if anybody's interested, the exhibition's on at T-Pow for quite a few weeks to come.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Helen. That's very interesting. I wondered, Helen Campbell, whether you'd like to say anything about it since the actual kiln is on your land. Would you like to unmute yourself, Helen, and say something? Thank you.
Yes, it's been a very interesting. It's been a while to have working on the kiln. We first found the kiln site about 1982 when the field was ploughed. Pottery, which is how it all started, about 1982. And from that, first beginnings, and then there was a lot and over a little bit and the kiln site.
Sorry, could you repeat that, Helen? We couldn't hear the last bit.
It was just latterly when Phil and the group for the last 7 years have come forward and done all this excavation. And there's such a nice lot to work for and to come down, and great company for me. So it's great to have had them. It's been very interesting.
I think members of the society, Brian and I visited, I don't know, many years ago. Yeah. I think very early on when the site was discovered, we had a visit to you.
Because we met you.
We met you then, yeah, a long time ago. That's interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else like to ask a question? Any of the others? Okay. Well, I'll call upon Steve Lewis to thank both Phil and Chris on behalf of the society. Steve.
Right, thanks, Sue. Well, many thanks both to Phil and Chris for a fascinating insight into a medieval kiln in almost our locality. And from what you showed at the very start of the talk, there appears to be a lot of interesting features across the whole site. And I suspect that's going to be enough work to keep you going for many, many more years. So thank you both very much indeed. Normally we
My pleasure.
Just do something.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before we finish for the evening, if I could just remind you that our final lecture or talk will be on the 28th of April, and that will be by Michael Blackburn, and it's about the Roman conquest of Britain. So that's, as at the moment, we're assuming it will still be on Zoom. It may be that Holt Community Centre will be available. We're in negotiations with Holt Primary School at the moment with regard to that. But we have asked for our dates from September to be at the community centre in Holt. So we are very hopeful that that will happen. As you know, in the summer months, we organise some things of interest for you. And the first one, Brian will remind you of these, but I do need to let the first tour person know. That's the guided tour of Chester Cathedral. Now, if you'd heard the talk by Nick Fry some months ago, it was excellent. And I have requested that Nick is our guide, if that's possible. And that's on Thursday, the 12th of May. It is limited to 20 people. So I will send something around and ask you to indicate if you're able to come. It would be in the afternoon of Thursday, the 12th of May at 2 o'clock. The cathedral do ask for a small donation of £5.
I know why.
And also we can have an afternoon tea in the refectory. So I'll send you information on that. Then our 30th anniversary is going to be a garden party at Borris Hall. We have 2 dates for that at the moment. Helen, can you qualify that at all? The date?
I think it's open, whichever date suits you best.
Well, what we thought, Brian and I discussed it today, and we've got the 2 dates for Saturday, the 18th or 25th of June. I think we would go for the 18th, and unless the weather is appalling and it was cancelled, then we would keep the 25th in reserve. So I think that's the way we'll do it. And again, that's available for all our membership, and it's our anniversary, 30 years this year. So that will be a rather nice way to celebrate as we did last year, but we were limited last year to 30 people. And the final outing is a guided tour of Molpus by Cynthia. And that, again, that's in July, the 21st, and that's in the evening at 6 o'clock. But we'll send you details and ask you to sign up for those. Give an indication. We don't hold you to it, but if you can give me an indication, especially for the cathedral, as they do need to know within the next 3 or 4 weeks. I think that's everything I wanted to say, unless anybody else wants to add anything. No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on. And as usual, we learn a lot. I think, Chris, your IT skills are amazing. And seeing things in 3D is excellent. Really, really good. And
30 years working on boring legal work.
Why do you think I worked with Chris for 14 years?
Well, your IT skills have come into their own, but you're using them for your enjoyment now.
Just
So,
a quick one. The first
How it should be.
yes,
first time I met Chris, he said, "Oh, I'm into IT and all that." Was 14 years ago. So I took him one side in the hill fort, had a good conversation with him, and he said, "Look what he did tonight." Marvelous.
Yeah.
that's
Well,
been great.
Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, John, for the technology, and we'll be in touch. And please do support the summer outings, and we look forward to your company in due course. Thank you very much.